Who was Sarah Losh? You may well ask. And we shall explore the answer as we visit the rural village of Wreay in the second episode of our series on Cumbria, not just the Lake District. It's hard to believe that the tiny village of Wreay is actually only 5 miles from Cumbria's capital city of Carlisle. This quiet, sleepy little village is a stark contrast to the heavy traffic and hustle and bustle of the city. The small community of Wreay is rich in history, shaped predominantly by former local landowners, the Losh family, and the buildings created by the remarkable Sarah Losh during the 19th century are still at the heart of that community today. The village was originally called Petterel Wreay, meaning at the bend of the river, and it stood at the edge of the vast Inglewood forest. Since the late 17th century, the welfare of the village has been overseen by the 12 Men of Wreay. They would meet at the Plough Inn every Candlemas Day, where they would eat their bread and cheese, smoke their clay pipes and deliberate on village matters. Apparently, they still meet today. At the end of the 18th century, the local industries were weaving and farming the land, most of which had been owned by the Losh family since around 1777. In 1929, it was noted that Wreay consisted of a church, a school, a parsonage, a post office with general shop, a smithy, the Plough Inn, and 4 cottages, all surrounding the village green. The buildings are all still there, and the school, the church, and the Plough Inn remain at the heart of this close-knit community. But what of Sarah Losh, you ask? You still haven't told us who she was. Be patient. We are getting there. Let's start with her grandfather, John Losh, who was known locally as the Big Black Squire. He claimed to have been one of the last men to repel the marauding Scottish cattle thieves. His eldest son, also John, was born in 1757 and inherited the Losh estate at Woodside. Sarah's uncle, James, was a barrister, an anti-slavery campaigner and a leading Newcastle radical. He was also a friend of the poets William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He played a big role in Sarah's life, accompanying her on her European travels. Sarah Losh was born on New Year's Day in the year 1786. She and her sister Catherine had a very comfortable upbringing as the only 2 children of John and Isabella Losh. The family's wealth came from their large estate. John Losh inherited the Walker coal mine in Newcastle in 1797, as well as a brine spring. Being interested in both agriculture and chemistry, he set up a very successful soda manufactory. The 2 sisters were educated by the village curate, and Sarah was encouraged to learn about antiquities, geology, and science. Certainly very forward-thinking at that time. Sadly, in 1799, when the girls were still only young, their mother died. Sarah took this loss very deeply. Following this sad event, her aunt Margaret took charge of the house, and she would also accompany them on their future tour of Europe. It is said that this 3-month trip gave them artistic inspiration and spiritual sustenance for the rest of their lives. John died in 1814, and Sarah and Catherine set about managing the estate. They redesigned the house and gardens at Woodside, having been inspired by the ancient Roman ruins of Pompeii. They also began to make their mark upon the wider village, building a school, a sexton's cottage, and a Pompeian cottage for the schoolmaster. Sadly, tragedy struck in 1835 when Catherine died just as they were planning their parents' memorial, and an inscription on their replica of Bewcastle Cross reads in Latin, "Two daughters proposed this stone should be set up. One performed it, greatly sorrowed." Nearby, inside a Druidic-style mausoleum, there is a sculpture of Catherine based on a sketch that Sarah drew of her sister. This brings us to St. Mary's Church, which houses the aforementioned cross and mausoleum within its grounds. In 1840, Sarah agreed to cover the full cost of replacing the dilapidated 14th century chapel, but only if she could have free rein over the design of the building. The result of this is perhaps one of the most charming churches we have visited. Sarah had a preference for the solidity and simplicity of the Romanesque churches she had visited whilst in Italy. St. Mary's was built over a period of 18 months at a cost of £1,088, 10 shillings and 4pence of her own money. It was somewhat of a community project at the time, with local stonemason William Hinson and his son undertaking work carefully guided by Sarah using clay models. Many other parishioners also gave their labour free of charge. The alabaster in the apse windows was cut to represent different aspects of fossils found in Northumberland and Durham, and even the gargoyles drew upon recent geological discoveries. The beauty of this church is in its simplicity, the interior intended as a celebration of God's creation. The carved decorations add to the rustic charm of the place and were, once again, all part of a community effort. The carving of the vine around the church doorway, with its gourds and butterflies, was undertaken by Sarah's gardener, Robert Newton. The stork and the eagle lecterns were carved by John Scott from the nearby village of Dalston. Sarah herself, along with her cousin William, were responsible for the carved alabaster font, and the curious pulpit was cut from petrified bog oak from nearby Ragmire Moss. It is very apparent that the design and construction of this beautiful church was a labour of love for Sarah Losh, and she certainly wanted to make her unique mark on this place of worship. An excerpt from her diary reads, "The walls of the chapel have been coated not with plaster but with Roman cement. This is a superior covering if not broken into, but its liability to crack unfits it for any wall designed for the reception of monumental tablets. These I would earnestly hope would not be introduced into a rustic chapel. the simplicity and uniformity of which would be totally destroyed by the glaring aspect of black, white, or coloured marble. Indeed, I would hope the time is not distant when Christians will have too much reverence for their places of worship to fill them with memorials of their dead, and that the pernicious practice of interment within these sacred buildings will soon be entirely abandoned. She was, we think, a woman ahead of her time. In the words of Dr. Henry Lonsdale, her intellect was of no common order, and almost approached in power that of my friend George Eliot, who now stands unrivalled in British literature. She had very much of the charm and brightness, if less share of the penetrativeness, profundity of thought and poetic eloquence possessed by the author of Romola. We're not sure how pleased Sarah would have been by that description, but we can only hope that we have done her story justice. Thank you for watching.